The Fed supports a system of fractional reserve banking, and U.S. banking is based on fractional reserves. What this means is that banks will take in deposits, and then they'll keep some fraction of these deposits in reserves and lend the rest in the form of loans. So when I take my $100 to the bank and deposit it in my checking account, the bank doesn't keep the $100 in a safe somewhere. The bank loans most of it out in the form of loans and keeps some of it in the bank. Now, what the Fed does is it establishes the reserve requirements. The reserve ratio is the fraction of deposits banks hold on as reserves. So if this is, say, 10%, then the bank has to keep 10% of my deposit in the checking account. And essentially the bank's concern is to make sure that we don't all show up on the same day and want to take our money out. But as long as we don't do that, as long as everybody who brings their $100 to the bank doesn't show up on the same day, then it doesn't need to keep all of the money in reserves. It can keep just a fraction of the money in the safe. Here's an example. The first thing that I want to point your attention to is the assets and liabilities chart on the right. That's called a balance sheet. And a balance sheet identifies in an organization, in a business, in this case a bank, what the business's assets and liabilities are. And those two sides always equal each other. A bank's assets must always equal its liabilities. So when I take my $100 to the bank, I deposit a $100 bank, and the bank now owes me that money. As soon as I put it in, they put it in the safe, and it becomes reserves. The bank's asset is $100 in cash. The bank's liability is the $100 that they owe me when I deposited my money in the bank. Now what happens? So suppose the reserve ratio is 10%, and the bank can go out and make a loan. A bank can loan $90. They have to keep $10 in the safe, and reserves are reduced by $90. But the loan, remember, is an asset to the bank. The bank is owed $90 by somebody else. The money supply then is now $190. The money supply has gone up, even though we have the same $100 in currency that we started with. They have $90 in circulation that's in the hands of the people they let the money to, plus the $100 in checking deposits that I gave them. The checking deposit is something that I have a claim on, and so the $100 in my checking account counts as part of the money supply. The $90 floating around in the economy is part of the money supply, and there's $10 now in reserves. So what happens next? Next, the $90 circulates its way through the economy and eventually becomes somebody else's deposit. The person who wanted to borrow the $90 buys something with it, and the person who receives the $90 can then put it in their checking account. So in a second bank, Second National Bank we call it here, we have a $90 deposit. The $90 deposited into a bank can turn into $81 in loans. Second National Bank has to keep $9 in the safe, but can lend out $81. At this point now, the money supply is $271. There's my original $100 deposit, the new $90 checking deposit at Second National Bank, and the $81 cash in circulation. And there's $19 total in reserves. And so on. $81 circulates through the economy, which eventually becomes somebody else's deposit into another bank. This bank now can lend out $72.90. And what you can see here is that initial $100 in currency can support much more than $100 in the money supply. In fact, we can calculate the maximum amount of money that can be supported by that $100 by examining the reserve ratio. And the money multiplier, it tells you the amount of money that the banking system generates with each dollar of reserves, as long as banks hold no excess reserves, then the money multiplier is equal to 1 divided by the reserve ratio. In our case, the reserve ratio is 10%, so the money multiplier is 1 over R equals 10. And so the $100 of reserves can create 10 times that, or $1,000 worth of money. By the end of the day, when all of this stuff is loaned out, there's going to be $100 in various bank safes and $1,000 in checking deposits.